Hello, everyone. Dr. Jimmy Brown here. First of all, thanks so much for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I do have one quick request. Please be sure to like, subscribe, as I'm trying to grow the channel. And if you have any topics you want me to cover, please be sure to shoot me a note and let me know. I'll put them in the queue. Can't promise how fast I'll get to them, but hey, I'm looking for ways to help everybody out who visits. So that's it. Hope all is well. Hope you enjoyed today's topic. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Jimmy Brown. Make a quick video for you today about personality. It's a topic I know we talk about a lot of different classes and different sessions, so I wanted to just kind of give an intro to what it is and isn't. And this is more of a general discussion than tied to any particular syllabus. So let's start off with what personality is. Personality, by definition, is the unique ways in which each individual thinks, acts, and feels about their life. It's different than, say, character, which are value judgments that we make. It's also different than, say, temperament, which are the kind of the way we respond to certain things, irritability, adaptation. Also very different than disposition, which is our current state of feeling. We'll talk about some different ways to measure these later. There's some tools, like say the DISC, that's real popular, that's a dispositional measure, versus say the Myers-Briggs or the Big Five, which are true personality measures. So what's the big difference? I always go back to what Robert Hogan used to say about personality being the innate traits that cause us to react to the world in a certain way. Now, the thing about personality that's specific is personality is relatively stable over time, whereas things like disposition and temperament can be impacted a lot by our environment. So, for example, if we compare it to, say, height doesn't really change once we hit adulthood, unless, say, we are, I don't know, we get like a tumor on one of our glands and we start growing again, which is rare, but it does happen. But it's also, or say like my grandmother who lived 109, in her late 90s, she actually started shrinking and lost a few inches by the time she passed away. Personality, much like height, kind of stays the same. Things like temperament, disposition, focus, those things can change with the environment quite a bit sometimes. There's different ways to think about personality. One of the original ones came from Sigmund Freud. Now, for those of you who've had me in class or heard me talk other places, you know, when I talk about Freud, I always make the point that Freud is kind of important from a historical standpoint, but a lot of his things have been kind of evolved from, for lack of a better word. What he presented, though, was the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego, which the id being kind of our unconscious, the ego being our most conscious, and then the superego being that where we feel the guilt or the moral anxiety, and much of that really being learned from our environment. When we apply that to different stages of life, this is where people about being orally fixated, anally fixated. Again, he kind of really was a little bit overly obsessed with these things, at least in my opinion. So I present it here, not because it's something I ever use in my work or too many people that I know use it, but because you will still see people referencing it, usually folks at cocktail parties who haven't really studied the science of psychology very much, but I want you to be aware of it to know that kind of, yeah, this is kind of where it goes, but we're not going to get too deep into that. Another more popular format is Maslow's hierarchy of need. Now, Abraham Maslow was very popular back in the late 1960s or 1970s. He and Carl Rogers came around really kind of this, self-awareness movement. And Maslow saw personality as really being driven by 5 needs: psychological, safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. Now, Maslow has some challenges with it. Number one, he sees growth as purely linear. One of my books that I have, I give the whole thing about how really personality development is kind of a cycle, not a linear development. And we really want to think about it more as sometimes your physiological needs may be met, then your safety needs may be met, and your love and belonging may be met, but you may have to go back and re-meet some of those over time, and it grows and develops over time. It's not a purely linear cycle. But it is very popular, and it is good for really explaining the basics of it, which is to develop, we have to meet these basic things, right? If you don't have food and water, you can't really worry about your higher needs. Some people also talk about self-actualization. Even Maslow himself said very few people achieve that. So, like 2%, I think, was the number I read one time. But that's just kind of a general intro to Maslow. The next format we'll look at is Hertzberg's hygiene theory, which this is about saying satisfiers versus dissatisfiers versus motivators. So, for example, these are the things that will demotivate you versus what will motivate you. And again, how much these impact you drive towards your personality. So, for example, recognition is a big motivator, but if we go back to the idea of introverts versus extroverts, the personality profile with the Myers-Briggs, we'll talk about in a minute. If you're not very externally motivated, if you're not an extrovert, you're not externally driven, recognition is not going to matter. When we think about personal life, a lot of people are more internally driven. That's going to matter. Lack of things, letting them deal with that is going to impact them more. The other place where we see this applied a lot is when we think about salary. Lots and lots of research shows that salary is only a motivator when you don't have enough to take care of your basic needs. Again, going back to Maslow. But if you have that, if those are all taken care of, salary no longer motivates at all. So the next thing we'll talk about, we mentioned before, is the Big Five personality model, which this is talking about neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion. If you ever want to remember the acronym, think of OCEAN. O for openness, C for conscientiousness, E for extroversion, A for agreeableness, N for neuroticism. And there's not that people all have these or don't have these, but everyone's either high or low on each of these. You know, this extroversion down here at the bottom, extroversion versus introversion is probably the most common category in the personality models. But again, conscientiousness, this is looking at, how disciplined we are. Openness means, are we able to imagine things? Are we willing to try new things out? Neuroticism, folks who are low on it, the term they use here is unflappable. People who are high on it, anything will shake them up. So everyone's kind of high or low on each of these five, and so you want to think about those. If we look at the MBTI model, which is the Myers-Briggs personality type or type, this is probably the most popular one. A lot of people now at parties like to guess who's got what MBTI type. This is, where that comes from. So there's really four categories that come from the Jungian model. There's introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. And you'll notice here the E, the S, the N, the T. Those are all kind of, what do we call it? They're here, I'll just go ahead and annotate here for you real quick. You see there, you got that E, that I, that N. These are what people will think of when they see these. So, so those are what people talk about there. When we think about this, the Maslowian or the MBTI model turns into four different. Let me clear these annotations. There we go. Just clear these out. Oops. Sorry, that didn't work. There's 16 different personality types, and we'll put those up here. And these are kind of, we think about this ENTJ, INFP. People like to guess what they are on those. So those come out. Another model that I use a lot is the Berkman, which is not as popular in MBTI, but I use a lot in my executive coaching, which is really thinking about, are we task focused? Are we people focused? Direct communication, indirect communication, those kinds of things. We use that a lot. And really it thinks about, also gets into what our needs. What are our basic needs? What are our areas of interest? And then it comes to these four components. So that's a real high level of personality. Hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, please shoot me a note, and we'd love to hear from you. Hope all is well.